Yeah, welcome. I'm honored to speak here in Paris on this conference. I will show a number of pictures which basically nearly all of them grab back on artifacts made by Frenchmen. But we have to have first a small introduction. I'm a type designer, and for me, this little man, Icarus, was very liberating because it enables us to make our own professional Type 1 fonts. Together with this little machine here, we could actually enter the professional world of type design and typography without being dependent on manufacturers and their own agendas. It enabled us simply to digitize our so-called artwork. And it opened up a lot of possibilities and experiments. That didn't mean for me that I had to do very funny things. I actually stick close to the roots. Quadraat is, here is a very old print, it's even called a mano. Quadraat was released in 1992. The world of font design back then was a lot simpler. Basically, the family of fonts was just a regular, a bold, an italic, and a bold italic. But not for us. Who needs bold italic? That's vulgar. We need small capitals. So that's what I did. I sacrificed my bold italic for small capitals. And actually, if you consider the situation today, Quadraat was a type design way ahead of its own days. It had small capitals, it had small capital figures, interpunction, and even weird little ligatures like those. Things which, like I said already, are common for any proper text phase today. We had the opportunity to release those fonts through, back then, a very important label, font label, which helped us to put these products in the world. They were picked up quickly by all kinds of designers and started really to lead a life on their own. And soon we established relationships with the users, and they had their own demands. And we could answer on them, on that. And so the family of typeface was like Quadraat, was growing, adapting to the needs of its users. So in the middle of the 90s, we added, I added the Sans, which is very humanistic. It's actually still one of the most humanistic Sanses around, and it's a very big harmony between the serif variation and the Sans. But yet, that was not enough. We had to do some posters, display fonts, and in the end we had a small, compact, but very effective family, which looks attractive. But I have to say that it's still the core of that type design is still the plain text fonts, the serifed text fonts. We need all the extras around it because we live in a world that, has more and more complex information, and designers like to use bigger families because then they can visualize the different levels of information. This is just a down-to-earth, very simple advertisement folder for a Christmas market way back in the 90s, but already we see here in such simple publication like this all the different variations of such a typeface. We have some funny things like this, and it's still around. Although it's based on French typography, French type, so to say, it's around in this today still, on the screen, and in proper books, like this book from Frank Chimero, The Shape of Design. Apparently, tradition is something difficult to kill if you want to do that. I don't want to do it, I just want to embrace it. What is Quadraat? Quadraat is in the end nothing else than an interpretation of French type made in the 16th century. And I came across it because I visited this building, which is the Plantijn Moretus Museum in Antwerp. I'm going there since the 1987 frequently to do more and more research. I tried to find answers. This is, by the way, the founder of the family, Christophe Plantijn, who was a Frenchman who traveled from Paris to Antwerp in the mid of the 16th century. Antwerp, back then, was a booming town, lots of business opportunities, and Christophe Plantijn was a very successful businessman. In his heydays, in his best days, which is around 1575, he owned 22 presses. A big printer in those days would have 3 or 4 presses, but no, Plantijn had 22. The site in which they worked is for a large part still there. And that we owe basically to the success of Christophe Plantijn, because he was so successful that after his death, the family continued printing, but they had so much profit that they also started to invest in other businesses. And those other businesses went also very well. So in a few generations, they simply lost interest in printing. And they let basically the print workshop muddle along, probably out of respect. But in the mid of the 19th century, they felt that printing cannot be done anymore as in the 16th century. And the print workshop started to make losses. So then, you know, the business spirit flares up, and what? We should stop this. What to do with this big printing house? With this, actually, it's a time capsule, actually. And so they changed it into a museum straight away. That was done in 1865, and since then, actually, it's the first printing museum in the world. And since then, a lot of people have done some research. The first one was the first director, Max Roses, followed by a number of people in the middle of the 20th century. Harry Carter, Matthew Carter, Mike Parker, the founder of Bitstream, Vervliet, and Leon Wood. This list is not complete. You can add some more names to this list, but these are the names on which I base my research the most. Later I come by, and back then in the 50s, the big questions was what, when, by whom, why, and proof of use. That's a huge amount of work. That's more or less done, and upon that I can step, and my questions are much more practical. It's more how and why so. Here we see Mike Parker as a student, actually. He just died not that long ago, about a year, I guess, beginning of this year. Yeah, I thought. Sorry, I'm not sure if it was this year or last year. He was a student, and it's good to know that later on he became one of the founders of Bitstream, which is the first digital foundry ever. Here we see some interesting pictures where they are cleaning the artifacts, historical artifacts, in this case punches, even with some rotating tools like that. A bit dangerous, but okay. Here we have Hendrik Vervliet addressing a young man who writes the signature on each punch. Those people did a lot of work, and that work can be used nowadays for various purposes. Like I said, I'm more practical oriented, and I'm interested in the processes and what we know about them. So I'm interested basically first of all in the punch, which is shown here, how those things were made, for what they were used. They were used to make a matrix, and that matrix was put into a casting mold. And in that casting mold there was liquid metal poured, and then we have a castling. Here we see the 3 steps next to each other: punch, the punch, the matrix, and the castling. This is all general knowledge. We know more or less how that went, but we do not really actually know everything or know all the tricks, know all the possibilities of what was possible and how those materials back then were used. Back to the punch. A punch is a piece of steel with a letter engraved on top. So in print it's maybe a flat image, but the punch itself, which is the mother image of typographic type, the typographic letter, is actually a sculpture. It has a real 3D thing. It's a real 3D thing. And they can be very big. Like this one. You see there my fingers at the bottom. It's quite a large punch. But the same fingers hold a punch like this. And it's a capital B. And it's about, you know, those flashy stripes. This is my fingerprint. So the capital B is about 3 stripes of your fingerprint big. You can measure yourself how big that is. But still the B is pretty okay when it comes down to proportions. I look at those materials, those artifacts, and I have to understand them. I have to understand as good as possible what it is I'm looking at. And that means that I'm a practitioner myself. So I cut punches myself. You see here an old picture of me giving a demo of cutting a punch, and the public actually can see what's going on a big screen here. I improvised a video camera with a second lens, which made a huge enlargement on the screen. So you actually can see what's going on. New things, old techniques, just to make things more insightful, more visible. And this is also, basically it's history of yesterday. This is actually smoke proof of a stage, how to cut a punch, what happens, different stages. We all know what a smoke proof is. So it's just a punch holding a candle, so it gathers soot, and then you print it on a piece of paper, and there you go. So now we know what this is, how it was made. And actually, this is, you know, the hit. The hole is made with the help of a counterpunch, and then you take away all the surroundings. Actually, it's this first and that, and that. And there we start again. Until you have something like a letter. This one is, of course, not finished. This is just a rough cut. And the whole process, if I feel okay and happy, it takes not more than 25 minutes. This was made in 1992 here as well in Paris at the Drupa conference or printing technology messe. So these are nice smoke proofs, and what I always mention is that probably they are the only smoke proofs in the world with a drop shadow. The DTPer scanned them in and put a drop shadow on it. It's basically a bit silly. Like I said, I'm a practitioner. That means cutting punches, not only that, casting, cleaning the type, rubbing it down, getting rid of all the things you doesn't need, and making quickly little prints so that book historians can have a look at material which it's not catalogued yet. If I go back to this process of casting and cleaning, usually we talk about how much two printers could print on working on one press, how many leaves they could print on in one day, how much castlings a caster could cast by hand in one day. But actually, if you really start, nobody talks about finishing the letter. So the casting and cleaning, dressing and gathering it and putting it in a case. How much time does that take? It was labor usually done by women and children, and apparently they were not important enough. But I've been doing some trials. So with a stopwatch, cast 10 castlings, clean them, dress them, and put them in a case. Then I do it again with 30 pieces and see what kind of number I get. And the number is actually strikingly high. It's about 1 minute and 20 seconds for one letter. If the letter becomes smaller than, say, 8 point, then it might run up to 2 minutes. We never heard about these figures because it was cheap labor back then. Like I said, women and children. But actually, I come to the conclusion that you cannot prepare much more than less than 60 letters in an hour to make them print ready, so to say, from the moment that inclusive the casting. Well, we've seen that. Come on. Sorry. All this, a lot of this practical stuff is, in the end, was published in 1996. So a little bit less than 10 years I've started my research. That was published in the book Counterpunch. And the first print run was a bit high, 6,000 copies. And somewhere around 2007 or 2008, they were all sold out. But the demand from the market stayed. So we didn't know what to do. Shall we write a new Counterpunch? Because there was a lot of new research done. But then the market said, no, keep it as it is as much as possible, because it is good as it is, and maybe it's a little bit of a small classic. So then in 2011, we managed, thanks to the help of my wife, Corinna, because she took care of the production. We managed to do a reprint in 2011. The book is not only about cutting punches, it gives some more insight in how letters work, how to make word images. It makes comparisons between sizes made by one punch cutter. It contains a lot of interesting material. Of course, the core of the book is how to explain how the punch was made or could be made. And this has been an exciting month for me, because at the beginning of the month, this month, there was even a Japanese translation. And thanks to the French state, 2 days ago, the French translation appeared. So if you want to read about French type in the 16th century, this is a good read. Things didn't stop there. I continued. After the book was published in 1996, there was a little bit of a break, but soon I went back to the museum because there was so much still to do. And I started to look not only at punches, I started to look at matrices as well. So we see here a capital V, which is in the material, so it's not coming towards you, it's away from you. Here is a nice sample of a capital O. What we see here in the middle is the bottom of the counter. It's a huge, deep counter. So here is the contour of the letter. And it's really awfully deep. You cannot make these kind of things with help of gravers. You have to use counterpunches for this kind of effect. The reuse of the same counterpunch can be seen here as well. This is a very small letter cut by the Frenchman Pierre Rotin. It's one of the basically more or less the first 6-point Roman type. And it has a mistake here and there. And those mistakes are repeated here and there, because there's a little bit of a fold in the counterpunch, but not big enough to correct it, according to Pierre. So it's just a little proof that counterpunches were indeed in use and reused. Another thing is that, of course, it's not the only way to do things. This is, again, made by a counterpunch because it has a small, smooth bottom and smooth side walls. Here we see hobbly-wobbly things. These are leftovers, tracks made by the graver of the punch cutter. So this is entirely counterpunch with the exception of this. And here we see that the shape has been dug out for the larger part. I showed this sample. It's such a nice sample of how not to do things. It's an AE capital ligature, and it hasn't any. It's been struck in a piece of copper, the punch, and the punch itself, of course, didn't have any straight contour at all. It is a very messy job, and entirely done by digging. So with help of a graver, you sculpt out the letter shape. This can be done, of course, much better. The maker of this is clearly an amateur, but this illustrates what the digging technique can do, what kind of tracks it leaves. So basically, if you have if you would make a cut here, then you have a punch which has been dug out, and it has basically this kind of irregular, often irregular shapes. This one is a totally different story. It's well done. The counters, or the areas which are in the letter, are having a flat bottom and very smooth sides, here and here. That means that's the model in the middle, which is can only be done with help of a counterpunch. Then we, of course, have a mix of techniques. We have this E, which have flat bottoms, some straight parts, but here at the top you can see all kinds of irregular corrections. So the punch cutter has been digging there to make the counter bigger. It was originally a bit too small. So that's this model, right? A mix of two approaches. Here again, this N, it clearly shows tracks of the graver. And then this M, which is nice and smooth, which points to the use of a counterpunch. So by looking at matrices, you can really see what was going on. Here we have another interesting thing. We have a lowercase a, they are both the same, but the accent, of course, on top changes. This is a very well-known technique, a kind of stepped punch or shoulder punch. It's a kind of 16th century making of composites, where the letter, the punch, has been a part taken out, and in that part we can put other little accent punches. This is the diagram, this is reality, and if we add some fingers, we have a sense of size. If we are interested in accents, we might take a look at Greek. Greek has a lot of accents, just about 23 accented alphas here. This is the mother alpha without an accent. And if we see an accent on top, we see that this alpha and that alpha are the same, which proves that the punches in use, that the punch cutter or the founder or the justifier or whoever struck the strikes was using, that the punch cutter was using the shoulder technique here. We do not have these punches, but looking at matrices enables me to look at punches which are lost. Here again, the mother alpha, and here we have an alpha with an accent below and an accent on top. And here we see that the two alphas differ. So in this case, the mother alpha was not used. In this case, the punch cutter somehow took the trouble to cut another alpha. But if we have two alphas with a comma accent below, we see that these two parts are the same. And these accents change. That means that in this case, the alpha with comma accent was one punch and was also used as a shoulder punch. They apparently didn't use double shoulder punches, maybe because it was simply too weak. The material was too weak to do that. But in this case, it didn't happen. By looking carefully at this material, you can really say, to a very precise degree, what was going on. But the things are getting more complicated and interesting as I'll go along. Here we have two P's. Good work from the punch cutter Grandjean. And we see that there's a little river here, and a little river there. And here, that river is becoming slightly wider. What is this? If we take a close look, we see it's also on the shank of the punch. It's a crack. It's a crack in the punch. Here we have the top of a lowercase h. And we clearly see that this punch had a crack when it was struck, and the copper of the matrix even went into the crack. Cracks are interesting. If you take a look at this, this is number 1, because it's pretty unharmed. We have 4 sets of these. Nobody ever took the trouble to compare them. But if you take a close look at number 2, which is probably this one, then there's a crack here, and there's a crack there. If we take a look at number 3, which is, to my guess, this one, then this serif is completely gone, it's broken off, and this serif moves further upwards. And in number 4, the situation is more or less the same, gone, broken, and another crack starts here. The 5th, which we do not have, but the 5th would probably lose that one as well. I'm very glad that I made those pictures myself, because if somebody would show them to me, I would say that he's a forger, because this is not possible. This is not possible, technically. It's only possible if we accept the fact that the structure of a 16th century punch is different than those made at the end of the 18th and in the 19th century. This punch, which can still be struck when it has this big crack, means that only the outer layer, a very thin layer, is hardened steel. The core is soft, flexible material, which keeps the whole thing together. So they were not cutting in steel, they were cutting in iron and carburized it later on. It's a real big essential difference, which doesn't pop up in our literature. But this is a clear proof that the structure of 16th century punches were probably different than the ones made in the 19th century and in the 20th century. So, what is it that I'm showing? Actually, a punch is, of course, not just an image. It is a whole piece of metal. It has a shank. And basically, there are 3 kinds: the torpedo or cigar, the pyramid, and the straight one. What I'm doing is I'm looking only at the top, which is copied into the matrix. So the shank, the below part, contains some information as well. It can be helpful by defining the age of a punch, who's the maker even, or a circle of possible makers. So it's some added value, but of course the real information is there. By doing this kind of work, like I said, I'm able to look at punches which are lost. And I have to say this over and over again, until they finally understand up there in Antwerp, that I actually increased their collection from roughly 1,000 punches into 4,000 punches, because there are 1,000 punches, and there are about 5,000 5,000 matrices. I also expanded the span of time from 1547 till, say, 1580. That's what they currently know to have artifacts, but actually, by looking at matrices, we can push the border back to about 1490. What I want from you is just remember one thing. It was Fred Smeijers, me, who told you that, not somebody else. But there's still a lot to see, and not only small stuff, small, complicated stuff. There is bigger, made of wood. It looks like wood type, but it's not wood type. These are wooden punches. They were used to press in sand, and then you would cast in sand. And then you had type which you could print. We have these punches who are cut by, or made by the Van der Keren workshop in Ghent. And we also have posters. At first we thought, no, we don't have any proof of use. Later on they said, yes, we have proof of use. It's only not from the 16th century. And I'm very glad with this because, you know, these are the oldest posters we have, typographic posters. And I keep telling that to the museum. Do you actually know that you by far have the oldest posters of Western civilization? Maybe there are more samples in other collections, but this, we have about 7 of them. So, good, nice proof of use of the wooden punches. Till, this is also nice, just a little anecdote. This is a real estate poster, it's about this size. And it says that this house is for rent. If you're interested, you can go to the city councilor's office. This is a fill-in poster. It has the number of houses and the date of sale. So it says that these 8 houses are for sale, and the sale will take place on the 1st of September. It's clear that this poster, you know, they were made in series. Apparently, a lot of houses were for sale in cities like Antwerp, enough to make these kind of things. This has 2 colors, because it's important. It's an advertisement for beer. Good beer from the town of Louvain. So, our oldest posters deal with 2 things. Your own house and a pint of beer. Not too bad. Back to the punches. However, I got a little bit suspicious. So, we have here a film which is taken from the wooden punch, so they fit. If I put them over the printed results, they don't fit. I show just a capital B. But it counts for the E and the C, etc. So that means that, again, we have to adapt. No, we don't have proof of use, not of this wooden set. There was some other sets around, which is used in this poster. Then there's another poster which simply shows that all the 3 lowercase ages, from Huis to Huren and Tresorius, are different ages, different letter H. They are made from different wooden punches if they were made like this. So there are apparently a lot of, more than 1 at least, alphabets around in those days. I show these because I'm convinced this happened in Antwerp. We are sure that it also happened in Paris, because Lebert could cut some really big Hebrew, for instance, and of which can only be done in wood. It's that big. So we don't only have no proof of use in Paris, but if it was done in Antwerp, it was done in Paris, it was done in Lyon, it was done probably in Frankfurt. Maybe librarians don't know how to classify these kind of things, but if you see anything like this, just let me know. From the complicated, heavy punches, we go to something more light, also French. Still got some time, can give it a go. We talk about stenciling. stenciling is a simple, direct technique, as these little pictures show. Looking at this, you right away know what's going on. If you show this to a 5-year-old, he really wants to get his hands on, and if you don't take care, he will be decorating the whole place. At least that's the same thing these people did back then, using their hand as a stencil, and some probably their own mouth as a spray can. I like this picture, but of course I'm more interested in letters that are stenciled. An early sample of Ave Maria. Ave Maria, Ave Maria, all around the church. Just one stencil, which has been used as a decorative motif. The calligraphy master Neudorfer, he used it in a display of some capitals. We see clearly bridges. And then we have to actually blame James Moseley for it all, for what's going to come. James Moseley gave Eric Kindle, he's basically the leader of this stencil research. He gave him a manuscript, and that manuscript is connected to these engravings. And the two connect because the engravings show a way of making stencil letters and how to use them, and the manuscript is a manual which supports that in writing how to do that. So Eric asked me if I could help him doing a reconstruction. And basically there are 3 kinds of stencil letters. There's just the normal open one, very familiar to us. There's the stenciled one, which is closed or touched up with other tools. And there's a kind of composite stencil, double parts, which simply connect and avoid bridges in such a way. The manuscript is about those 2-part letters. The stencil letters were meant to be used for books like this, Antiphonari, huge, impressive books. Here we see on a title page an engraving. This is the enlargement. We see here a choir standing in front of such a book. Here's another book. Here's even a pult with another book. 2 men with sticks giving the rhythm, bouncing on the ground. And if things are correct, yes, here we see something like that in real still, with some people, Claude Roland, to give you some idea of how big these books actually can be. Back to this, we see on there stencils. They look much different, very different from stencils we know nowadays. And we did a reconstruction, actually we did 2. And we slowly talked about it, lecturing. And finally we made an article about it. There are some slides of the article showing what, reporting on the reconstruction. And basically I'm going to show you how it really works, because these are just a set of a few of those stencils made a la Debbie Yap method. And what you're going to do is you're going to look from there. So the whole thing is going to be turned around. There's a little movie to explain how it works. So you have the stencil plate, 3 elements, the lumière, the first letter part, the spacing dot, and the last letter part. You put that in underneath a ruler, and you start stenciling along. Then the only thing you have to do is to move the stencil plate along that ruler, so that the second part comes above the stencil of the orientation dot. And then you have a letter which, in principle, doesn't have to look like a stenciled letter. This is simply an I, of course, that's a simple letter without a counter. You see here the use of the lumière, which is being used to define the distance to the previous letter. You stencil it again. Come, hurry up. It's about 1.5 minutes, so don't worry. And then we go to the next one. Here you see the Lumiere in action. You put it against the serif. You cover it. And do the next letter, which is also a two-part letter. The first part, the dot, move it. Move the second part over the dot. Fill it in. And there you go. Do the next letter, which is the last letter, by the way. Here you see really the Lumiere in action again. It's a nice invention. And then we do the last letter. Second part, over the spacing dot, or orientation dot, sorry. And so we have the word height, which is reasonably spaced and which doesn't look like stenciled letter. So this method, which is really a French thing, it's a very nice little French invention, has the following advantages. You don't have to draw baselines. You can space your word images perfectly okay. And the letters are stenciled, but they don't have to look per se as stenciled letters. If you're interested in this, you can read more about it in Typography 9, which is available at Hyphen Press. Typography Papers 9, sorry. Another French thing, so to say, is these letters made by Gabriel Barry. They were bought by Benjamin Franklin here in Paris. It's a whole box. Franklin used to be a printer, so he had some interest in letter shapes, I guess. And he bought from a French stencil maker a whole set of stencils, which still exist. And actually, since all the business correspondence is there, we can really date these stencils, and basically they are more or less the oldest stencils of letters we have. There's a little sticker in the box, and it refers to the maker and its location. Eric Kindle dug up a nice picture, so somewhere behind that building, Barry had his workshop. There's a lot of content, so to say, but very vignettes, of course. Barry was basically an early graphic designer. He made complete vignettes. Here, the stencil for a vignette for a carte de visite. And it has a little specimen, which is very interesting, because the most interesting part for me is this here. These words, église, first column, second column, and then there's a smaller third column. They go down in size relatively smooth, and I think, or we think, that, although we cannot really prove it yet, but that a pantograph might be in use to reduce those letters and to make those stencils, which Barry did with help of etching. The pantograph was certainly in Barry's days a very well-known tool. So that's a possibility. If that's true, then this is the French were the first to use a pantograph in letter production, because those letters were used in mass, in series. They look like this, different than the letters, stencil letters written or described by Debier. It's just a plate with a bend, and then we have an indication of the baseline, the stenciled, the etched letter, and an orientation dot or a spacing dot. They were made very nicely, very skilled, good work. You can tell by the script. script N, or by this nice Tuscan R. So that's a really good job, chapeau. Yeah. So after a year or 10, I said to Eric, he tries to hide behind the poster here, Eric Kindle. I said we have to do something more than just lecturing about it. Let's make an exhibition. So we did that, and designer friends over, one of those necessary small galleries which seem to disappear more and more, where you can arrange such things, present such things. So we had in 2011, I think, was it 2011? We had this little exhibition on the stencil letter. A nice little exhibition, and until now we think that this is the first exhibition on the stencil letter at all. Stencil letters were exhibited as a part of another exhibition, but completely on stenciling. This is probably the first exhibition ever. It shows a lot of artifacts, because stenciling is, like I said, a very easy, understandable, cheap, effective method. That it was very, very important. We forgot its importance, but the artifacts show that it was, every household had its own set of stencils. We made a small publication, a catalog, 2 languages, Dutch and English, showing some of the artifacts and explaining something of its history. And of course we made stencil fonts. So big posters showing some of the so-called Our Type stencil series. The series which I directed, the total series is here, which is a nice collection of stencil decorative type. I'm pretty proud on this little thing. And they are used now and then even. Here it's a cultural center somewhere in the States that uses one of the stencil letters, stencil fonts. Printing museum in Lyon used it in a catalog, small catalog about paper. And then of course, the italic, you find it on a piece of a bottle of German sect, which came as a Christmas present. So what I do next to that is I mix 20th century materials and problems with old methods, and then you can play along doing silly, interesting things, making new stencils, using the Debier method for hiding your baselines. And actually, it's interesting stuff. You can easily do simple things, make simple forms and repeat them. So, for instance, there's a spelling mistake. Etwas Neues ist nicht alt genug. That's all. This is all you need to quickly make that, and it's not stenciled with paint. It's just used with color pencil. I slowly started to incorporate these methods in teaching. Often, students are shocked by the fact that they have to do entirely things by hand. But it's also fun, and the word got around, and Gerard asked me if I was interested in doing a workshop in Urbino this summer. From there, things started to roll, and I did, and it was really a very nice experience, because a lot of about a third of the participants were not graphic design students, the kind of students I normally teach to, but there were some product designers, architects, and even a librarian. And in Urbino, the weather is nice, you can work outside. you know, the results, even for complete novices, can be very satisfying. And it's a very direct method, so it's quickly very appealing. It's simply fun to do. Yeah, this is actually my, just in time, I guess, my last slide. Oh no, this one. There's some more impressions. It's my last slide. So what is this all about? I think it's living by doing, looking forward and backward as much as you can at the same time. This results in an interesting mix of information and discoveries which belong straight to a real academic environment. It can deliver exciting methods for teaching. It produces the usual lectures, publications, exhibitions, which we hope stimulate people and get people interested in certain things. And it even can, you know, have a commercial spin-off, which has some really commercial value, which is always good for your bank account. So all that, why? Just to keep things going, I think. Let's do these things and keep on designing with pleasure and interest, preferably in a better way than we already did. I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal of things, of what I do. I have to say, we have to. It doesn't fall out of the blue. It's hard work, and if I would work under a chef, which would look on its watch and see what I was doing, none of this would have ever see the light of day. So it needs a certain kind of climate, whether it's in an institution or in your personal little economic world, but you need the space to do this. Plain, bare, capitalistic economics will not allow such a process, such approaches. But I think it's worthwhile to have them around, and we should not forget about that. Thank you.